Vice Admiral Kamala Harris sat above from George Stephanopoulos beneath the bendable flat lights of Good Morning America. And from the alfresco it looked like aloof edition affable political interview. Smiles were in place. The choir were calm. The questions at Aboriginal were easy. But article was amiss because aloof 10 account beforehand backstage. Harris's aggregation had threatened to abolish the actualization altogether. And no one watching at home had any idea. What Kamala didn't apperceive was that producers had afflicted the articulation aloof hours of for airtime. The Aboriginal plan, above-board account about Biden's bread-and-butter wins, had been scrapped. Afterwards, a last-minute alarm from chief ABC executives. Viewership was down. They bear a moment, article real, article viral, and they absentively Kamala would be the moment. The carnality admiral was seated. The date was lit, the admission began. And appropriate afore the cameras went live. George looked above the table and said quietly, "Aye, achievement, you're ready." That was the Aboriginal assurance because George never says things like that. And Kamala knew in that breach additional. That article was coming, article her agents hadn't able her for. What neither of them knew was that millions of bodies watching from home were about to see a battle no one expected. The Aboriginal 5 account were smooth. Jobs, numbers, aggrandizement. Easing a few all-encompassing questions about the economy. Kamala backward on message. She delivered the talking credibility with able clarity, animated aloof abundant to assume confident, but austere abundant to admonish admirers she wasn't there to play. And again George afflicted everything. He leaned in, bargained his articulation. Slightly, and asked the catechism Kamala's aggregation had absolutely warned producers not to ask. He said, "Madame Carnality President, there's growing speculation, alike oral your own party, that you've become accountability for the 2024 campaign. What's your response?" Kamala's announcement didn't move, but her blackout lasted too abnormal. Too long, she said. "I anticipate those comments reflect political noise, not political reality." But George didn't let go. He said, "Are you added your own colleagues in the Democratic affair are amiss to be anxious about your leadership?" Kamala replied, "I'm adage the American bodies adopted this administering because they believed in our vision and that eyes." "Hasn't changed," George smiled, "but it wasn't warm," he said. "But their aplomability have? Your approval appraisement is at 32%, lower than any carnality admiral in avant-garde polling history. Do you booty albatross for that? The abeyance was beneath this time." Kamala said, "When you're the Aboriginal woman and the Aboriginal woman of blush to authority this office, you're advised by an altered standard. I'd booty albatross for accomplishing the work, not for how others accept to circuit it." The atmosphere shifted, George said. "So you're blaming the media?" Kamala's articulation backward even. "I'm adage we both apperceive how narratives get shaped, George, and I'm not absorbed in distractions." But George wasn't effective on, he said. "Let's allocution about the border. The administering put you in allegation of the clearing crisis. 2 years later, the bearings has worsened. Illegal crossings hit almanac highs. Do you accept you've succeeded in that role?" This was the moment her aide stood up abaft the cameras. A bashful signal, admonishing to producers, but they didn't cut. Kamala's jaw clenched aloof slightly. She said, "I've formed with leaders above Central America. I've affianced on basis causes, not headlines. Solving a decades-old crisis takes added than complete bites." George accursed back. "But what if the American bodies don't see results? What if they abandon the complete bites, and what they see is failure?" That was the moment Kamala, confused, advanced in her seat. She said, "Are you actuality to ask questions or bear accusations?" George didn't blink. "I'm actuality to allege for the admirers who appetite answers." Kamala replied, "Then maybe allege to them about the truth. Not about polls, not about affair gossip, but about what's absolutely blow on the ground." The restriction was blubbery now. The set was bashful except for their voices. No laughter, no cards, no music, aloof ability attempt alive on air. And again, George above the final line. He said, "Do you accept today, appropriate now, That you are the best actuality to beforehand this country if Admiral Biden were clumsy. To serve? Kamala didn't allege appropriate away. She looked anon into the camera and she said, "Yes, I do." And the actuality that you feel the charge to ask that on civic television says added about you than it does about me. The ascendancy allowance froze. The producers' Duke hovered over the go to breach button, but it was too late. George said, "Some abilities say that acknowledgement didn't affect confidence." And that's aback it happened. Kamala stood up, not in anger, not to storm off. She stood like addition who had absently she didn't apperceive the allowance annihilation more. She removed her mic and she absolved off the set after a word. Admirers didn't see the anarchy that followed. They didn't see the date administrator rush to stop her. They didn't see the whispers in the ascendancy room. The ballast advanced panic, the ambassador shouting, "Stay wide, break wide." They didn't see the exact moment Abaka Chief ABC controlling gave the order. "She's done. Cut her feed." And that's how it happened. Kamala Harris was removed from the alive advertisement of Good Morning America. Not because she yelled, not because she bankrupt down, but because she banned to comedy the allotment they capital her to play. And aback the cameras returned, George was sitting alone, attractive bottomward as if alike he wasn't abiding what had aloof happened. The backfire began afore the articulation alike ended. Clips of Kamala walking off the set hit amusing media while George was still speaking. It didn't amount that the arrangement accustomed to bland it over. It didn't amount that they pivoted to a feel-good adventure about a back-to Academy arcade in Ohio because no one was alert anymore. The country was watching the blow, and no one could exceed on what they had aloof seen. Some said it was weakness. Some said it was strength, but no one said it didn't matter. Inside the White House, the acknowledgement was immediate. Chief agents? Awash about phones. The communications administrator replayed the footage 6 times in blackout afore saying, "They set her up." No one disagreed. But what complicated things was that they knew this wasn't an accident. It was coordinated. Addition at ABC had afflicted the segment. Addition had accustomed the new questions. And addition had leaked aloof abundant of the battle in beforehand that political agents on both abandoned had pre-cut annotation accessible to column oral minutes. This wasn't aloof news. This was a takedown. And Claw Harris had absolved beeline into it. Oral 2 hours, the account were everywhere. Kamala walks out on GMA. VP confronts media hostility. Adversity account or adventurous defiance. No one could adjudge what anecdotal would stick. But every arrangement had footage. Every podcast had an opinion. Every architect had a theory. And again, Kamala did article no one expected. She said nothing. No columnist release, no tweet, no spin. For the blow of the day, she backward silent. And in that silence, the media began disturbing itself apart, aggravating to ample the vacuum. Some alleged her a coward. Others said it was the best accurate moment of her political career. A few appropriate she had been baited into failure. But the added they debated, the added bodies started rewatching the absolute clip, and article aberrant began to happen. Admirers chock-full laughing, they chock-full criticizing her tone. They started acquainted George's expression, his interruptions, the bend in his questions, the smugness in his delivery, and boring. The accent of the chat began to about face because what Kamala had done wasn't airing out of an interview. She had absolved out of allurement and she hadn't yelled. She hadn't snapped. She had aloof stood up. The abutting morning, a bourgeois columnist wrote, "I don't exceed with her politics, but I account what she did. That wasn't an exit." That was abnegation to be humiliated. That column went viral. So did edition 1 from an adolescent atramentous announcer who said, "I've watched women like Kamala be asked to smile while actuality disrespected my accomplished life." This time she didn't, and that matters. The course was Axis and Kamala still hadn't said a word. 3 canicule later she assuredly bankrupt the silence. She appeared unannounced at a bankrupt aperture route in Atlanta, sitting with aerial academy girls from above Georgia, who were ambitious leaders, organizers, and activists. One of them asked nervously, How do you break calm a backbot as appear? For you on TV? Kamala smiled. She said, sometimes the best able affair you can do is not perform, not explain. Aloof angle up and leave the table. The blow was a quaint after any fanfare, but it advanced faster than annihilation the White House had appear in months. Because this time it didn't complete like spin, it articulate like truth. And while political analysts kept debating whether the moment helped or aching her future, the viewers, the absolute admirers, had already fabricated up their minds. Article had shifted, and not aloof in Kamala Harris's angel in how the country saw power, silence, and control. She hadn't been kicked off Good Morning America. She had alone the abstraction that she had to stay, and that difference, that one quiet best, would answer far above a morning appearance segment. It would alpha to redefine what address beneath burden looked like. And it would admonish millions that sometimes walking abroad isn't weakness. It's the alpha of article stronger.